Hi, everyone. I'm David Aragona here with my DRF colleague, Marcus Hirsch, for the 2022 Breeders' Cup pre-entry webinar. We will be taking a look at the Breeders' Cup pre-entries for all 14 of the Breeders' Cup races. A lot to get through on this webinar, but Marcus, I know that there's been a lot of anticipation about who's going to be in these races. This week, we finally found out who is in the fields, who is going to be out. Some horses are cross-entered, but we're going to finally get some clarity on who might be in these Breeders' Cup races because there's a pretty stacked group of 14 races on tap for Friday and Saturday of Breeders' Cup weekend.
Yeah, it's a lot to get through. I feel like I have a complete handle on everything right now. But kidding. I mean, I feel like I'm ahead of some years where I'm still learning the names of the horses, like the 14th horse in the Juvenile Turf sprint. You don't know until the day before the race, but I mean, tons of full fields, lots of information to parse. Yeah, we better get to it.
Well, obviously, with it being just over a week out from the Breeders' Cup, we don't quite have our handicapping opinions set in the races just yet. We have to wait for the actual post positions to be drawn, but we're going to go through each Breeders' Cup race, just giving some initial takes on the pre-entries, who's in the fields, how the races might shape up. We'll go through some replays, talk about some stats, and hopefully at the end, once we get through all 14 of the Breeders' Cup races, we'll have some time to take some questions that we got in to give some insights into how these races could shape up and how the track might play, weather, all those things. We'll talk about that at the end of this webinar. Before we get into the nitty gritty though, let's take care of some housekeeping. Get ready to bet the Breeders' Cup on DRF Bets. You can join DRF Bets today with promo code STAKES to get started with a $200 first deposit match bonus and access formulator past performances. Just go to drf.com/bet for more information. Bet with confidence on DRF Bets. Again, that's drf.com/bet. Also, put yourself in position to win big with the Breeders' Cup with a DRF Breeders' Cup package. Get pre-entry past performances, final pass performances, clock reports, betting strategies, which Marcus and I will be working on, and much more. Just go to shop.drf.com to pick up a package and save up to 36% off the retail price. Again, that is shop.drf.com. Well, Marcus, we've got a lot to get through with all of these races. Before we dive in to all 14 of these Breeders' Cup races, though, a big point of discussion is the international contingent coming over for these races. A lot of unfamiliar names to U.S. handicappers, so a lot to be learned looking through all these international contenders. And I know you were doing a little bit of digging to find out how some of the international performers do at different Breeders' Cup venues. So we do have a graphic to take a look at that and just kind of walk us through this a little bit, Marcus.
Well, yeah, I did for the advanced edition. I did a story on all the European horses, which is just kind of a broad overview. I'll be doing an even deeper dive for both Friday and Saturday. So yeah, these are all the Breeders' Cups since the event went to 2 days, which I thought was a good dividing point. And then I made the point of listing the synthetic era in 2008, 2009, where European horses did much better because they weren't running on dirt. They were running on a surface they more accustomed to. I mean, obviously, it's not a huge sample. There's been some ebb and flow. But what struck me was like 2 to 3 wins is the standard. There are a couple outlier years, a 5 in 2013 and none on the very wet Monmouth Breeders' Cup. But the last 2 years, 9 total winners. And also, if you go back to 2015, while there were only 2 winners at Keeneland, I looked up all the stats for that, and the European horses occupied a great number of the top 3 placings in all the turf races. I just think 2 things. Maybe our grass horses are getting weaker, so the European horses have even more of an edge than they might have in the past. And also, you could see Keeneland being a more suitable venue for European horses too. Just on the main than California, for it's an easier ship to some extent, and also just the climate is so much more similar to what they're coming from.
Yeah, I noted there was a lot of discussion prior to that 2015 first Breeders' Cup at Keeneland about how that might be a more suitable venue for the Europeans. And, we have a very small sample size. Obviously, they did better in 2020. But as you said, they're typically involved in these races, even if they're not always winning. And we
Except
did have
for one.
Yes.
The first race on the whole 2 days.
Yes, that is correct. We'll talk about that in just a bit. But that's some good information from Marcus. And, we do have the privilege of seeing plenty of racing at Keeneland just prior to this Breeders' Cup being held. They're running their typical fall meet right now. And I did notice early in this fall meet that the turf course was maybe playing a little bit harder than in the past. We had some very fast times, but that could all change with some rain if it comes late October, early November. Typically, we do have not the typical hard, firm turf courses that you sometimes see earlier in the year at Keeneland.
I'd be surprised if it were anything like it was an opening weekend where they were really skipping over it. And even just today or this week, I've noticed that, they're kicking up, it's listed as firm, but they're kicking up a lot of turf. It just inevitably, when you get this late into the year in a climate like Lexington's, the grass just doesn't hold together in the same way.
Well, let's start by going through all 5 of the Breeders' Cup races on Friday, where they run the 5 stakes for the 2-year-olds. And we'll begin with the first race that's scheduled of the Breeders' Cup 2-day event, the Juvenile Turf Sprint. And as Marcus was alluding to, this is one where there's typically a strong European presence, but they haven't necessarily had the level of success that they have, particularly the other 2 Juvenile Turf races, as well as some of their Saturday racing. It's a really sharp 5.5 furlongs at Keeneland, Marcus. The Americans at this stage of the game generally have a little more speed than the Euros, and sometimes even those that come over from Europe with strong credentials are not able to produce their form. And I think that's a big question for the potential favorite in this race, the Platinum Queen, who we will take a look at winning the Prix de la Baie. Historic victory by this filly against older horses.
Yeah, I'd say, they've been sending boatloads of horses every year. They ran a place last year. That was the first time, I believe, any of the horses, maybe there was a third at Keeneland. It's just generally been unsuccessful. And the main thing, as you'll see in this race here, these horses are mainly racing down straight courses, and the turn gets them by surprise. The Platinum Queen may be the best horse that's come over for this race. That's the second time she ran against older horses. This is something they do in Europe that we don't see here. They allow 2-year-olds into some of these stakes. They get a massive weight break. I think she got 24 pounds from the runner-up in that race. Her other race was the Nunthorpe at York, where she ran against a leading Breeders' Cup turf sprint contender in Highfield Princess and ran very well to be second, while giving her, I think, 26 pounds or something. But this filly has only been down the straight. I will say that she's handled a variety of course conditions. She's very fast. She may have like American kind of speed. I think she's pretty legit. I think that maybe as a whole, this is a better group than has come over in some instances.
Yeah, I think it's a hard thing for American handicappers to assess how much a weight break of 20-something pounds really mattered in a race like that, because we just don't see that in this country. And, people might wonder why she has time form ratings that are so much lower than a horse like Highfield Princess, which we'll see in the turf sprint the next day. And it's because those ratings they give are based heavily on the weights these horses carry. Yeah. So she doesn't have as big of an edge on figures or time form ratings as you might really expect when you take a look at the PPs. Sure. There are some other Euros that we should talk about, particularly Persian Force and Mischief Magic, who faced off last time in the Middle Park Stakes. They finished 3rd and 4th in there. Mischief Magic is the charge of Charlie Appleby, and he is, of course, always dangerous in these American Group 1 races.
Yeah, I believe at the Breeders' Cup, he's 6 for 11 wins, which is off the charts. Now, Persian Force, he's a horse with a lot of speed, and he ran into, in his last 2 starts, Blackbeard, who was intended for this race before suffering a career-ending injury earlier this week. But in the Middle Park is the biggest English race for sprinters. It's a straight 6 furlongs. Newmarket, it's probably a little more testing than we would think of 6 furlong races. By testing, I mean they go uphill during the finishing stages. So, it's not... You have to have a sprinter with a little bit of stamina to him. And this horse, after showing a lot of speed, I think he's quite fast, just didn't quite see it out. But I thought he ran very well in defeat and has good form through the Prix Mornay as well. I think he's a possibility, but again, he's never been around a bend, and he'll be running into some other very fast horses too. It all could, it could take, I don't know. I just don't know if he's going to be up to the task. And the other horse you mentioned, the Godolphin horse, I thought he had a pretty good setup in the Middle Park, and he just didn't finish it off the way I wanted to see. I suppose he's got the potential to improve. And as you alluded to, Appleby and Godolphin, their horses in North America tend to run exceedingly well. So he's not out of the question if he shows the necessary improvement, but he would have to.
Yeah, I agree with that take. I feel like Persian Force is the one that might appreciate the slight turn back to 5.5 a little bit more. Mischief Magic, more of a closer, was pretty impressive in that all-weather victory too back, but like you said, just didn't have that necessary turn of foot in the middle park last time. But there could be a lot of speed in this race to set up a horse like that, and we should talk about some of the American runners that could be forwardly placed, particularly the, go ahead.
Can I mention one other European horse who's going to be a price? Lady Hollywood. I think she might be pretty good. She might be able to outrun her odds, and she's the only horse that's been around a bend at Lingfield. Actually, that's a 2-turn race, so she ran around 2 left-handed turns, and she actually quickened on the second of those turns. I mean, she didn't beat much in that race. It's a Class 5 race, very low-level competition, but she did just smush those horses. I don't know what happened in the Lother Stakes. She had no excuse that I could see. She was in behind. She didn't quicken at all, but she came back with a pretty solid win. And that, I'm not underestimating the fact that she has already been around a bend. It's just a question of if she's good enough or not.
Yeah, she is well-traveled, having won stakes in 3 different countries, and could be one that's a big price in this race. As for some of those American contenders, a lot of which do have speed, we should talk about the top contender for trainer Wesley Ward. He's typically dangerous in this race, and that is Love Reigns. We do have a replay for her when she made her most recent start in the Bolton Landing Stakes at Saratoga over the summer. Marcus, she was pretty good this day, got a fast speed figure for this victory. I think the form from this race has held up reasonably well, but we just haven't seen her in nearly 3 months.
Yeah, she was entered and scratched from a race at Keeneland, but I don't think he ever intended to run her. I mean, I don't mind that she hasn't run. He's really good at getting these horses ready off breaks and with sprinters. My feeling is that the easiest kind of race to have a horse ready from a layoff is a turf sprint. It's easy, they don't have to travel as strongly as they do on dirt, and then 5.5. It doesn't take a ton of stamina. What is Ward like? He's won 3 of the 4 of these or something. I mean, he has the best turf sprinters, and I know she didn't really show out in the Queen Mary. He didn't have a good year at Royal Ascot this year, generally speaking, except for Campanelle ran really well. But I mean, I'll be surprised if she's not in the top 3, and she's probably the deserving favorite in my mind.
I would say Ward has had an off year generally with his 2-year-olds, but she definitely seems like one who has talent.
Really has, yeah. His first-time start has just not been winning at nearly the rate they have.
Yeah, we'll move on to the next race in just a moment, but I should mention 2 horses with dirt form that I think could attract some support in this race. Speedboat Beach and Tyler's Tribe. They both have drawn into the field as far as the Breeders' Cup Selection Committee has determined. Just not sure either one has the turf ability to compete here, even though they do have some pretty impressive dirt speed figures.
Well, I don't like Speedboat Beach at all, but I will say that Tyler's Tribe is my first crop sire, Sharp Azteca, who has done very, very well early in his career with a limited sample. But the turf sprinters is what he seems to get, and he's had some success. It's just, like you say, they're both speed horses in a speed-filled race, and I don't know if either one is going to have the quality to quite see it out.
Yeah, this is a tough race to decipher, the first one, the Juvenile Turf Sprint. 26 pre-entries in total, just 12 will get into the field. Let's move on to the second Breeders' Cup race of that Friday card. It is the Juvenile Fillies on the dirt. And Marcus, compared to the Juvenile, which we'll get to in just a little bit, the Fillies have not run nearly as fast. We don't have as many standouts as there are in the Colts and Gelding category. It just feels like there are a lot of fillies that still haven't quite proven themselves yet. And the favorite could be Chocolate Gelato, who won the Frisette. We'll take a look at her winning that race in the slop at Aqueduct. But this isn't necessarily a performance that makes her that formidable against this field.
Yeah, I think I'll probably see her as overbet. I don't have a pick in this race yet because I need to do some more granular dissecting and look at some works. But I do think that these 2-year-olds are still improving so much week by week. It's so early in their career. I mean, this horse was kind of a talking horse, right? Wasn't she a terribly short price in her first race where she lost? I think she's fine. I mean, We'll see how much she enjoys going farther. I mean, she bossed this field, but I just don't know how much I totally respect the horses behind her there. But again, like, I certainly don't want anything from the West Coast that I've seen in this race. I think that the Alcibiades over the Keeneland track was okay. The horse Chop Chop, making her first dirt start, she ran all right, and I can tell I might be sucked into Raging Sea, who is third in the Alcibiades. Probably, like, right now, I would say that she could be the best value in the race because she ran a contending race. She cost herself a chance at victory by wandering off her line and running into a horse who's probably going to finish fourth anyway and getting DQ'd. But that's her second start. I liked her maiden win a lot. I think you did too. And she's a curl in. She's not going to have any trouble going the trip, and she should be getting better race by race. She could be interesting.
Let's take a look at the stretch run of that Alcibiades, which Mark was just describing a little bit. And I agree, these horses are a little tough to separate. It is encouraging to see a horse like Chop Chop able to work her way through traffic and pass horses, though I thought, all things considered, she got a pretty good trip. Given where she was early in the race, you can see the trouble right here that Kijera had, who was also pre-entered in this race, although second preference, as Raging Sea veered out in the stretch. It just felt like Raging Sea was getting a little unfocused at the end of that race. I agree, moving forward, Raging Sea is a horse that I think might have a future, just given her pedigree going longer. I share your concerns about Chocolate Gelato going the two turns. She strikes me as one that is very fast. She was much more impressive in that 6 furlong maiden victory than she was going the mile last time. And she's by Practical Joke. That's a sire who really has much more success around one turn than two turns.
Absolutely.
So a little skeptical of her. We should mention the California filly and Tell Me No Lies, who is a 2-time Grade 1 winner coming in here. She just hasn't run particularly fast in her 2 races out there.
Yeah, I mean, if a California horse runs in the top 3, it won't, I'm not going to make any money in the trifecta. I just don't. These horses they seem to be a cut below even the moderate performances in the Midwest and the East. I will say that, if you're just thinking long-term strategy as far as multi-race wagers and even internally, this seems like a race where, like, it's possible you could see a huge long shot that, a horse that just improved several lengths on the day, just because I don't think that the supposedly better horses are really that much better than the horses that are going to be much longer prices.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think this is a spot where you could be convinced to get a little bit creative with reason. I mean, a horse that I think is going to be a big price that I'm a little bit interested kind of preliminarily is Grand Love, who Steve Asmussen entered.
Oh, yeah, me too.
Disappointing last time in the Iroquois because I loved her debut at Saratoga. Survived a fast pace. She's bred to go longer. I don't know what happened in the Pocahontas. I think I called it the Iroquois, the Pocahontas. But she's one that it intrigues me that she's even in this race. So I would want to give her a long look.
I agree with everything. I liked her a lot and thought she would only get better going longer. And it's absolutely, you nailed it with Asmussen going forward into this race off of that poor performance. I mean, that when that barn expresses this kind of confidence, there's usually something to it. So yeah, definite second look at a fair price.
Well, up next, back to the turf course for the Juvenile Fillies Turf. This one going a mile on the grass course at Keeneland. And another pretty wide open race, Marcus. I guess the horse that's supposed to be favored here is the Aidan O'Brien trainee, Meditate, who I know early in the year looked like she might be one of the best 2-year-old fillies in Europe, but she did disappoint somewhat in a couple of Group 1 tries over there, beaten by the very promising Tahira, and then last time also losing the Cheveley Park. She's one where I think stamina might be the chief concern because she obviously stacks up on class.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I guess it was disappointing because she lost as a favorite both times, but Tahira is possible. I mean, whatever else she does, she was a star on that day, and people will note that Meditate was more than 4 lengths clear of the third horse in an 11-horse field. She ran a winning race. She just got run down by a filly that was incredible on the day. And similarly in the Cheveley Park, I mean, I thought Meditate ran well. The Zoo, who won, I just think is a really nice filly. I went through all the dam's performance, and I think she had one other sibling who wasn't very fast, but did win over 1.25 miles. The dam was kind of like 6.5, 7/8, which in Europe is close to a mile. And No Nay Never is a sprinter miler type. And I came down on thinking, she might have just enough stamina to get it done on quality, but probably not too much value.
Yeah, I agree with that. I have some concerns about her getting this distance. And the sprinters stretching out sometimes do take money in this race off their Group 1 form over there. Aidan O'Brien also has never-ending story in here, who I don't think is impossible. She's improving at the right time, and I don't think there are really any stamina concerns for her. She's a daughter of Dubawi, who was recently third in that pre-Marcel Boussac behind Blue Rose Sen, who is not in here. So she could be another one for the Aidan O'Brien stable that's a little bit interesting.
Agreed.
We should, though, mention some of the American, or I should say North American, contenders in this race. Let's take a look at the last start of Delight, who won the Jessamine Stakes. Now, Marcus, this was an impressive victory. I mean, when a turf horse wins by 5 lengths, clearly they put forth a big effort, but she had everything go right from a trip standpoint here.
She did get the easiest of leads, but I will say that she made the most of it. I believe she might have had the fastest finishing time in the race. I know it was the runner-up, Knock Your Socks Off, came from a long way back and made up quite a bit of ground, but I believe I recall seeing that the winner actually came home faster than she, or at least the last 8. Interesting. I do put a lot of stock over success over the Keeneland grass course in the fall. It's a quirky surface that not every horse enjoys. I think that while that horse did benefit from the circumstances that day, I'm not sure that she has to be ridden that way. She looks like a horse that was kind of improving race by race, and she might be more legitimate than the great setup that she got in the Jessamine.
Another horse coming off a prep victory is Pleasant Passage, who won the Miss Grillo Stakes at Aqueduct. She is 2 for 2 in her career for trainer Shug McGahee, and one that's gone off at a big price in both career starts, but has outrun her odds each time. I'm not sure about the quality of the Miss Grillo, but she is a horse that does seem to have versatility with regard to running style, and that could be a feather in her cap as she tries this tougher spot.
I mean, we can't spend too much time in this race, so you better get to the horse that you really like.
the horse that I really like in here, or the one that I'm kind of leaning towards, is Kijera, a horse who I was happy to see when the pre-entries came out did get selected into the field. She's not stuck on the also eligible list, and she's actually a horse who finished ahead of Delight when they ran at Saratoga, both beaten by a very good Chad Brown trainee who has not run back since. But Kijera, she ran on the Alcibiades on dirt last time. I thought ran fine, kind of showed her quality there, but I believe she's a better turf horse, and she's one that I'm very intrigued by getting back on turf here.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same way, and maybe she will be a bit overlooked. I do feel like her form from Saratoga was perhaps even stronger than the stakes form from back, but we'll see.
One more horse I want to mention before we move on, another European horse, is Midnight Mile, who is 2 for 2 in her career, appears to have some upside, kind of like Pleasant Passage over here. She's gone off at big prices in both career starts, but I like the way she sliced through the pack to win that oh so sharp last time. I guess you just have to wonder about her overall quality and the kind of form, the kind of company she's been facing there.
Yeah, I will say that the trainer has had this race marked down for quite a while for her, for whatever reason. She's 2 straight course races. She's also a No Nay Never, but gets more of a dose of stamina from that Galileo mare probably that Meditate does. Also, Joseph O'Brien's Basil Martini kind of came out of nowhere. She was a maiden, and she went to the lead and won the Weld Park at the Curragh last out. And the horse she beat is decent. I mean, I don't know exactly what to make of her. She does look like she's improving, and she'll be a price.
Yeah, and we didn't even mention the Canadian shipper, Last Call, who won the Grade 1 Natalma last time. Not sure that was a vintage edition of the Natalma, but she definitely is one that improved. And she is coming in with the highest last out buyer speed figure of anybody in here. But obviously, that does not take into account the European contingent, and they definitely have some strong runners in here. Let's head over back to the dirt course and talk about the Juvenile. And Marcus, this one is likely to feature the biggest favorite among the Breeders' Cup races on that Friday card. That is, of course, the Bob Baffert trained Cave Rock. Let's take a look at his victory in the American Pharoah. And what can you say about this horse? He has just been untouchable in his 3 starts out west, running gigantic speed figures. He looks like a real special 2-year-old.
Well, he went a very fast pace, and he finished off. I mean, a 2-year-old in October is not really supposed to be able to do that. It was a freakish performance. What do you think, that there's a vulnerability here in some way, or are you just like, you got to eat the short price?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that American Pharoah performance, it reminded me of that Champagne by Uncle Mo, when he had to go some fast fractions and then just kind of, accelerated at the top of the stretch to get away from that field. A really impressive effort. And, since passing the 2-turn test, I mean, it's just pretty hard to look past him in this race. I mean, the other horse that I guess you would consider his main rival is Forte, the Breeders' Futurity winner, and we can take a look at him winning that race. The runner-up in here, Loggins, is not going to be running back, but these two did put on a nice show. And Forte is a 2-time Grade 1 winner, just does not have the speed figures of his main rival, Cave Rock.
Yeah, so like, he closed into the 46 and change pace. It was Loggins that ran the more similar race to Cave Rock, being able to almost survive that, and he may have been fouled in this stretch run that we've watched here. Forte does have good wet track for him should it rain, and he's a likable colt who ran pretty fast. It's just like, I mean, I don't even know if he can beat the runner-up in the American Pharoah, National Treasure. I mean, that horse ran, like, in most years, he would have won that race. 97 Buyer. Hijazi, who is third, has got quite a bit of ability himself. I mean, he's only run twice. He was chasing the whole time last time. I doubt that he has, like, the upside to turn the tables on his stablemate, but he's pretty good too.
Yeah, I think he is a nice horse, and I can forgive his loss in the Sanford. I've liked all 3 of his other races. It's just a matter of whether or not he can get anywhere near Cave Rock, who, just like you said, appears to have freakish ability, and we haven't necessarily gotten that sense from anybody else in this field. I'm glad you pointed out National Treasure, who does have the 2nd highest buyer in this race, and clearly he was not in the same league as Cave Rock last time, but certainly is in the mix to achieve a trifecta placing here. I mean, I guess to answer the question you asked before, the only real vulnerability I can see for Cave Rock is if someone really goes after him on the front end and sets a suicidal pace. I mean, we do have pre-entrants in this race like Hurricane J, who figures to be upwards of 50-1, but he is a horse that possesses a lot of early speed. Tyler's Tribe is pre-entered in this race, though he has first preference in the Juvenile Turf Sprint. He would obviously inject some pace if they decided to go this route instead, but that's the only way I can see Cave Rock losing. He just seems to have more natural ability than everybody else.
Yeah, I'll mention the inefficient Strider, but physically advanced Lost Ark, who had a really terrible trip in the Breeders' Futurity. He did run pretty well in the sapling. He's a horse who could get into the trifecta picture at a big price if they go really fast.
I agree with that. He's got that paddling action to his stride, but he definitely seems like one that's been improving with some added distance. And like you said, he did have a rough trip last time in the Breeders' Futurity. Let's move on to the final Breeders' Cup race on that Friday card. It is the Juvenile Turf. And, with regard to the European contenders coming over and having success in different races, we talked about the Juvenile Turf Sprint not having a whole lot of European trained winners. It's a totally different story in the Juvenile Turf, Marcus. I think I was looking it up, and 10 out of the 15 runnings of this race have been won by European shippers. Charlie Appleby, who does have a horse in here, he has 3 of those. Aidan O'Brien has 4. Yeah. And they're definitely going to be major players here.
I agree. But I can see maybe a little more appeal from the Americans here than in the filly race, even though I don't love any of them. But it's probably going to be one of the Euros. It's just a question whether it's going to be Silver Knot or one of the O'Briens. I mean, I give both of O'Briens a chance. Cairo, He might like it a little firmer, whereas Victoria Road has more stamina and might like it a little softer. So he's kind of got one for both surfaces. Cairo ran in exactly the same race at Dundalk that Hit It a Bomb ran in. When he won at Keeneland in 2015, he won this race, for whatever that's worth. He lost, but he ran well, and then he improved again in the Kilovonen Stakes, going over a relatively flat left-handed course at Leopardstown. It's a track that more resembles American race courses than most in Europe. And I liked his race there. And I think he is going to be a little bit of a price. He's pretty good. But you did the line for this race. I think you made Silver Knot the favorite, I would guess.
Yes, I on my preliminary DRF morning line, I did make Silver Knot the 3-1 favorite in this race. Charlie Appleby just has had so much success recently in the United States, even outside of the Breeders' Cup, and obviously he won this race last year with Modern Games. Speaking of Silver Knot, let's take a look at one of his recent victories. We're actually going to go 3 back to take a look at his Solario Stakes. This was one of his more impressive performances, just the turn of foot that he displays once he ranges up on the leaders here. And clearly this is a colt with a lot of quality, Marcus, and like a lot of the runners that Appleby and Godolphin bring over, he appears to be improving prior to his American start.
Yeah, even in his one kind of misstep where he's beaten a pretty wide margin in the race after this on soft ground, he didn't run badly. And the horse that won that race, Chaldean, came back to win the Group 1 Dewhurst, kind of the biggest race in England for non-sprinting 2-year-olds. Yeah, I mean, these are inferior foes to what he ran against even last time in the autumn, but he did beat them nicely, and he did okay in his synthetic surface race too. They picked this horse out over whatever the horse's name that won the Summer Stakes at Woodbine so easily, and everyone thought he was going to be the horse for this race. But Appleby had this horse marked down even before the autumn as his Juvenile Turf runner. You must think he's going to handle the turns well and will suit American racing. And from what the judgment he's made in the past, he seems to know which ones to pick out.
Yeah, and based on form, Silver Knot seems like he might even be a class above Mysterious Knight, who is that horse that won the Summer Stakes and is not back in here. So he definitely seems, at least to me, like the one to beat in this Juvenile Turf. I think we covered most of the European contenders. We should mention a few of the Americans. Chad Brown has a pretty interesting runner in this race, and I'm Very Busy. He did lose at a very short price last time in the Pilgrim Stakes, but I think a lot of people expect that he's one that could take a step forward, getting back on a firmer turf course, if that is the case, just given how impressive he was in his debut up at Saratoga. But Major Dude, who beat him that day in the Pilgrim, I mean, he definitely put in a gritty performance to turn back I'm Very Busy.
He did, and it was one of those races where everyone wanted the runner-up right away, and then you start to think, well, maybe he just wasn't quite as good. I was among that group. I probably would prefer I'm Very Busy. I would say also it's worth noting that the Keeneland turf course is sand-based, and it can be yielding supposedly, but they'll never call it soft because supposedly, it doesn't really get deep like that. Like I said, it's a quirky, funky course. And even though Major Dude handled the softer going at Aqueduct, it's no guarantee that he would like Keeneland. The horse that did handle the Keeneland turf course, I think, is one that I might favor over all the Americans. And the Winner Is.
And let's take a look at And the Winner Is winning the Bourbon Stakes in his most recent start. And both of his turf victories have come over this Keeneland turf course at different times of the year, obviously, and on much harder turf courses than he's likely to encounter in the first week of November. But still, like you said, he's got that experience, and this was a visually impressive victory.
Yeah, and you have to take into account he got a tremendous setup. But there haven't been a ton of horses that have won this meet like running like he did, with that big looping move from the back. I think the horse has a lot of quality. He was kind of in no man's land after breaking his maiden so early in the year on turf, and they tried him on dirt. He didn't run well in that dirt race, but he does train well on the dirt. I think the horse has some quality to him, and I think he's interesting. I mean, Wayne Catalano wins Breeders' Cup races. He's a great horseman. And he likes his horse a lot. Of course, he likes a lot of his horses that don't win races, in my experience. But I think there's something to this horse.
Call it East Coast bias, but normally I would not consider a California shipper in a race like this. They just haven't had a whole lot of success. But I will say Paxawallop has looked pretty dominant in his 2 stakes victories out west. And it's a different beast tackling a turf course like Keeneland and shipping all the way out here. But he might be better than the average 2-year-old that you see coming in from California for this race.
Absolutely. I think I like him a lot more than anything I've seen in recent years coming out of the same races. He just seems to be, he seems to have a better turn of foot, more positional speed. He looks like a real horse. You know, shipping into a completely different kind of course, and he's going to be facing horses that are his equal for the most part, instead of horses that he's bossed around with his superior ability. And we'll see if he can take another step forward. But he's not a toss out for me.
Well, I think that wraps up our takes on the Breeders' Cup Friday races. Let's move on to Saturday and talk about the older horses that will be in action in the 9 Breeders' Cup races that day. We'll begin things with the Filly and Mare Sprint, going the 7-furlong distance on the dirt course. And Marcus, this seems like one of the more wide open Breeders' Cup races. There's not a clear leader in this division. And the fact that Wesley Ward has been pretty adamant that Kamari is going to run in the sprint instead of against her own gender here, she was declared as first preference for the sprint in pre-entries, it just makes this race even more open.
Yeah, he just doesn't want the 7 furlongs with her, I guess. And I guess I suppose you can see why. And she's a 6-furlong horse, but excuse me, you run into your own impediment going against the boys in Jackie's Warrior. Totally agree. Wide open race. CC won last year. She's back, and she bounced back to some extent in the Chillingworth after a dud in the Ballerina. I thought she was kind of, I mean, I like the horse. You know, she beat, she's won route races before. She beat, who'd she beat? Pauline's Pearl earlier in the year, the Azeri.
Yep.
She's she's shipped to Florida twice and won the race there over the summer. She's a likable horse. She's won half her 22 starts, but I just thought, she kind of backed into victory last year in a race where Gamine didn't run her race at all. I don't think she's a likely repeat winner, but I do think there are a lot of other plausible horses. The ones I'm most considering, I guess, would be champion 2-year-old filly Echo Zulu, Goodnight Olive, and I've developed a fascination with a horse that I didn't ever really like that much until recently, Frank's Rocket.
Yeah, let's talk about the horse that is kind of the now filly coming in here, and that's Goodnight Olive off her victory in the Ballerina. We'll take a look at the replay of that race, and this was a breakout performance for her. I mean, obviously, she had shown talent right from the start for trainer Chad Brown, but achieving her 5th victory in a row here in her first try against Stakes Company at the Grade 1 level, this was a pretty legitimate performance, but I think the big question is, can she repeat it?
Yeah, I would say that Caramel Swirl is a cut below, really. And Obligatory didn't run her best race that day. And Goodnight Olive got a perfect trip. But she made the most of it, and she ran a good figure. I think she's got a hint of Wavell Avenue to her. Chad Brown's winner, I guess, in 2015 at Keeneland. A horse like similar to this who just kind of got good at the right time, and you wouldn't have considered. No one even thought of her as a contender for this race, earlier in the year. But as you said, she is the now horse, even though she hasn't run since August. You see this with a lot of trainers; they don't mind coming into this race with a fresh sprinter, the sprint as well.
Yeah, if Goodnight Olive is the now horse, I guess the then horse would be Latruska, who is the surprise entrant in this race. I mean,
yeah,
pretty shocking to see her in here. I mean, she has sprinted in the past a long, long time ago before she got good. It just feels like this is more of a desperation move, which you don't often say in the Breeders' Cup.
Yeah, I don't like it. I mean, she has been showing signs of crumbling a couple times now. She bounced back to some extent in the Pursuance, and she had no fight to her in the Spinster. She's been an amazing mare who had an awesome 2021 up to the Breeders' Cup. I hope they're doing the right thing by her.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Frank's Rocket, who I feel like is kind of one of the forgotten horses in this division. And it's because they so rarely run her in the top races. It feels like they got burned running her in that Breeders' Cup Sprint. I guess it was 2 years ago at this point, and she's kind of
Yeah.
avoided Grade One competition ever since then. Uh, I just don't. They don't handle her with a ton of confidence. She was actually entered as an MTO in a race at Aqueduct pretty
What was
recently.
what was that
I
all
mean,
about?
it was very strange. I mean, especially if they had this race on their radar, but on speed figures, she fits with everybody else. And I know that they've handled her like they don't want to run her 7 furlongs, but I don't see the problem with it based on form.
I agree with all of that. And I mean, Charles Tyler is not maybe a true barometer because it's such a short home stretch and it's a 2-turn race. But I thought she ran fabulously that day. I thought she moved a little early in the Kamari race and got run down by obviously a very good horse. I mean, I just, for whatever reason, at age 5, this is a better horse than she's ever been in her life.
Yeah, I've never been the biggest fan of her, but I can't deny
Me
that
either.
her performances have taken a big step forward this year. You mentioned Echo Zulu, who I agree with what you said about her. I think she's one that could be on the upswing. I mean, I don't want to forget obligatory. If some pace does develop, you know she's going to be flying at the end of this race. She just is the kind of horse that really does need that setup.
Yeah, and even the good race she won at Churchill Downs, these are better horses. I just don't know if she has it in her to pass them all, even if she runs her absolute A race.
Let's move on to the second Breeders' Cup race on the Saturday card. It is the Turf Sprint. And Marcus, this is another one where we typically have a pretty strong European presence, but they don't always have the level of success that you see in some of the longer races, though I think they did have a winner at one of the Keeneland Breeders' Cups recently. Golden Pal among the Americans is the one that is considered the horse to beat in this race. He is the defending champion after having so impressively won it at Del Mar last year. But Keeneland, the 5.5, it's a different kind of race than what he won at Del Mar. And I think you could look at his 2022 form in two ways. You could say, well, they've tried some different tactics. He went over to Europe, and you can make excuses for a few of his races. His last start at Keeneland shows that he's back on track. Or you can say he just doesn't quite have that same pop out of the gate or the spark that he had as a younger horse.
Yeah, I feel exactly the same way. I throw out the King Stand. This horse cannot run overseas for whatever reason. He's not suited to it. And I was there at Keeneland in April when he won the Shakertown, and his break that day was amazing. That looked like the horse that won the Breeders' Cup. Granted, the horses behind him are not anywhere near his class, and he dominated. But didn't break well, just gutted out a win over not Breeders' Cup level competition in the Troy. And he broke better in the Woodford, but I agree he wasn't quite as brilliant, and that was just not a very strong field. I mean, even a subpar Golden Pal was supposed to beat those horses, and he did. But this is a very strong race. He doesn't mind if it's wet. He loves Keeneland. His speed is an asset. He'll probably just go out and win, but I'm not totally sold.
I agree, especially in these last two victories. He just has not beaten the level of competition that he's facing here, and it's not like he's been as dominant as we've seen in the past. And I think you might agree with me. I'm not sure that he definitely even has the best chance of the runners coming out of the Wesley Ward barn, because I don't want to overlook Campanelli, who certainly can run in Europe and arguably has run better in Europe than over here.
Yeah.
But she's put forward some pretty respectable efforts in the US. And let's take a look at her victory in the Giants Causeway from earlier in this year. This was, of course, over the Keeneland Turf course.
Yeah, I guess you sniffed out my love of this filly. I am a big fan. Her overseas record is extraordinary. I think okay, so she couldn't stay a mile. She ran admirably in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies, but she does like Keeneland, as we're seeing here. I thought she just was so superior in this race. Star Divine is good, not great. She's just ran last weekend. She ran pretty good third, I think, in hurt level. But this Kentucky Downs race is the key, because this filly looked like she was just going to gallop with, past the 8th pole. And she either pulled herself up or didn't quite see it out. The 6.5 there is tending more towards 7 than 6.5. Funky course. might have just been a little farther than she prefers, but she loves Keeneland. She loves 5.5. She's going to be an overlooked horse, and I'm probably leaning in her direction.
I agree. She's very interesting in here, but we do have to talk about some of the European contenders because I know a strong set of runners came over for this race last year. Most of them probably weren't suited by that sharp 5 furlongs at Del Mar. You could argue that the European contingent this year is even stronger, and Keeneland's turf course should play to their strengths a little bit better. And leading the charge, obviously, is Highfield Princess, who is coming in with a pretty impressive win streak, showing the kind of consistency that we don't often see from European sprinters. And we'll take a look at one of her more impressive victories in the Nunthorpe. And I mean, she is not just winning these races, she is just dominating her competition.
Well, what was especially impressive here, David, is she had just won the Prix Maurice de Geest over 6.5, which is a completely different kind of race. She backs up to 5, and she gives, we talked about this earlier, you know, she gave Platinum Queen so much weight in that race, and she clipped right by her. Glass Lippers was the filly that won, the only European winner of this race at Keeneland in 2020. She also she ran in the Flying 5 and then ran the Prix de l'Abbé, squeezed in another start. This filly is coming in fresher. I should say Mare. I mean, she didn't hit this form until this year, and you know, if she'd done it once or even twice, you might be a little more suspicious of her. But not only has she won 3. Has she turned in 3 outstanding races? She has previous form around turns too. And she's obviously very adaptable, both in terms of surface and the types of races that are run. And I'm really looking forward to seeing her.
Yeah, I mean, she is a horse that has obviously improved a ton from earlier in her career, but she's been cycling up to this level for a long time. She was a good horse last year, but she's clearly taken a step forward as a 5-year-old mare, and it just seems like she's on another plane than the European sprinters right now, and it's going to be interesting to see if she can translate that form over here, because, Marcus, I think you'll agree with me, if she runs her best race, I don't think anybody's beating her here.
I agree. She's got the best. She's got the best. She's hit the highest level this year of anyone in this race.
Do any of the other Europeans interest you in here? Because we've got a few with some credentials: Emiratiana, the Charlie Appleby Godolphin pair of Naval Crown and Creative Force.
Emiratiana does not interest me at all. I mean, he's a good horse. He's had a great career. Creative Force for Appleby is the one that caught my eye a little bit, but I'd be concerned if he probably wants it firmer. I don't know how he's going to adapt to this course. And the 5.5 is definitely on the short side for him. But he's run some races this year. I know he got beat by Naval Crown at Ascot, but I think he's gone the right way, and the other horse has gone the wrong way. But I mean, I can't really have him just because it's probably too sharp for him. And there are, if it were a wide open race where I didn't think the top contenders were all that'd be one thing. But I just think there are some really good horses here.
Let's move on to the next race on Breeders' Cup Saturday. Back to the dirt course. It is the Dirt Mile, this one going the 2-turn mile at Keeneland. And the 2 turns could be a big factor in this race, Marcus, because we've got plenty of top contenders that are stretching out from top performances at 7 furlongs to this Dirt Mile distance. And this is just always a weird race every year. It's kind of like a consolation prize for the horses that typically go longer. It gives the 7 furlong specialist an option to not go to the sprint and dilutes that race a little bit. So we've kind of got a grab bag of different runners in here.
Yeah, you've got the diluting factor, and then you've got the fact that this is such a bogus race. I'm sorry, I just hate it. With a short run to the first turn and then a short run to the wire. So you've got a huge percentage of the race taking place around turns, which is not ideal. That's not really what you want in championship level competition. But it is what it is. And I will say that I think this is probably the strongest edition of this race, top to bottom.
It's a field with some very fast horses in it. They're not among the top horses in either the sprint or the classic division, but they definitely are some good 7 furlong to dirt mile specialists. One of them that will be trying older horses here for the first time is Cyberknife. And let's take a look at his victory going all the way back to the middle of the summer in the Haskell. And Marcus, he's beating a pretty good horse here in Taba, one that I know some people think is a big threat in the classic, which we'll get to later. But this was Cyberknife at his best. Yes, he got a great trip this day, but he really showed a nice turn of foot to get the job done here. and he seems like one that will be suited by this turn back to a mile.
I agree. He's not like a one-turn horse like some of these may be, but he's also not necessarily a 1.25 mile horse. I thought he ran his race in the Travers. He just ran into a horse that stayed better. And I thought the Haskell is really his breakthrough. He was such a unprofessional, I guess, horse early in his career. He just was a goofball, mornings and afternoons. You can see that Brad Cox tried him in blinkers twice. They both came off after one race both times. He was all over the track. For him to go from that kind of sloppy, just going out there and running around kind of colt to the one in this Haskell where he, slipped into the position that Taiba vacated when he was racing Greenlee and coming off the bridle at the 5/8 pole, and then to make his second move up the rail, really responding to his rider's cues. Big breakthrough for him. I guess the only question would be maybe he was a little flat in the Pennsylvania Derby. He's been on the go for more than a year. Does he have a bounce back race in him? Maybe.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see what kind of trip he can pull here. He got a little too far back early in the Pennsylvania Derby. I don't think he ideally wants to be coming from that far back. We are likely to lose some pace from this race because Jack Christopher, who is pre-entered here, has first preference in the sprint, and it sounds like Chad Brown is very much leaning towards going there, so he's likely not to run. But there are some other horses that could provide some pace, and I think one horse that would appreciate that is Cody's Wish, who probably wants to be rallying from a little bit off it. We'll take a look at his breakout performance when he won the Grade 1 Forgo over the summer, of course, beating the likely favorite in the sprint, Jackie's Warrior. And this was Cody's Wish at his best, Marcus, but he'd been cycling up to this level for a while now. He's a nice horse.
I like him. I like him in this spot too. Even the Challenger at Tampa, that was a good race for that race. He's Scalding. I know he went off form and it went to the sidelines, but that horse was good at his peak this spring and summer. He's a good horse. That was Cody's Wishes, just like get back into the game race. Jackie's Warrior, probably at this stage in his career, is a little better at 6th and 7th, but to run him down the way this horse did, that's a really high level that he hit there. I think he could work out a decent trip depending on where he draws. I mean, if you draw away on the outside here, forget about it. But I like him a lot.
Yeah, he's a horse that I know has kind of been pegged as a one-turn specialist, but I agree with your take on him. I think that his two-turn efforts are not a true indication of how he's going to do in this race. They were all kind of along his arc of improvement, I think, pretty consistently. It's not like there were big drop-offs. We should mention kind of the dark horse in this race, or maybe not the dark horse, because I was kind of perusing our colleague Brad Free's morning lines for this dirt mile in our Breeders' Cup section, which you can access on DRF.com. Just go to Breeders' Cup in the top navigation to see all of the pre-entries, comments from me and Brad Free, and plenty of articles from all of our DRF colleagues about these horses. And Brad pegged Laurel River as the morning line favorite in this race, which I was a little surprised by, but I mean, he ran huge last time in that Pat O'Brien, but he's another one that will be stretching out. However, unlike some others, he does have some big performances at the flat mile around 2 turns.
Yeah, maybe he's better than I give him credit for. And Senior Buscador, who's in here too, came back and won pretty well. But, I mean, I don't know. American Theorem, he's not Jackie's Warrior, is he? And moreover, whereas we've talked about the way that Cody's Wish has cycled up to this level and, got there incrementally and kind of proved himself, this last race was so far off the charts for what this horse has done before, and it was at 1 turn. If he's the favorite, I'm playing against him.
Yeah, he's a horse I really don't know what to do with because, like you said, he has not faced this level of competition, but he's definitely an intriguing runner in this race for the Bob Baffert stable. Let's move on to the next race, the Filly and Mare Turf. And this is another one that seems pretty wide open where we have some Americans facing off against Europeans. It's hard to figure out who's even the best in each of those respective categories. Let's begin with a replay of one of the American runners that is in Italian. And she is probably the best horse among the Americans in this race based on her performances here and in the Diana. But I guess you do have to question the stretch out to 1 mile and 3/16 a little bit.
I suppose in a vacuum, one would. Personally, I don't have a. I think she stays. Um, went so fast in the Diana and still finished well at 1.125 miles. I don't think she's going to have to go that fast here, and she just is one of those horses who can maintain a steady pace over a distance of ground. I mean, she was a pretty comfortable winner over Regal Glory, setting legitimate fractions at Keeneland. So she's got that all important, to me, win over the course. I think she's better. It's hard to see just from looking at the lines how good she is. To me, she showed a lot from the very start. She wasn't getting big numbers. She ran at Tampa. She controlled a slow pace in the Honey Fox. People didn't think that field was that great. Wakanaka is okay. Churchill, she's inside on a huge outside bias course that a lot of horses didn't like. Just a game. She was completely sacrificed to go after Legs Galore, who was setting it in breakneck pace, and the race just completely set up for her stablemate Regal Glory. And then she was allowed to run her own race in the Diana, which was, I thought, an excellent performance. And then she was even better last out. I suppose the distance is the question. I think that she'll stay, but she still might not win because this is an excellent field, in my opinion.
Yeah, she has definitely taken a step forward, and I agree with your entire synopsis of her career. I mean, she had those excuses and was probably improving more than people realized ahead of that Diana. She just is in great form right now and clearly is leading the American contingent, but she's going to have to beat some pretty nice Euros that are coming over for this race, and among them is Nashua, who was the runner-up in the Prix de l'Opera, which a few of these are coming out of. We can take a look at the stretch run of that race, and she is a 3-year-old filly who was good over the summer, but seems to be taking a step forward towards the end of the year for John and Thady Gosden. And she's not one of these runners that is going to be badly pace compromised in this race.
No, she's a really nice horse. And this was a really good race. They called the ground soft on Arc Day at Longchamp, but I think it was more like very soft, and it might not have been her thing. I think she's a better ground horse. So if you account for her potential dislike of the surface, it's hard not to see her as a main contender. Is she like some sort of standout? Not to me. I'm not even sure she's the best European, but she's very good.
Who else would you be considering of the Europeans? Above the Curve was also in that Prix de l'Opera. She's a Joseph O'Brien trainee who really was right there at the finish with Nashua. Yeah. And we've also got some Aidan O'Brien trainees in here.
Yeah, Above the Curve, if it's wet, if it rains for a couple days before, I think she's going to have a good chance. Her whole year has been quietly good. She's lightly campaigned. She ran at Chester, which is a tight-turning left-handed course, more similar to American tracks, as is Leopardstown, where she started her season. And we talked about that course before. And then in the Prix-St. Allery, which I usually consider pretty bogus Group 1, she beat Plastic Carousel, who won that Prix de l'Opera. This is a good horse who's improving. I think she's very legit. But if the turf is not rain sodden, then I am very interested in Tuesday for O'Brien, who was, she was lucky to win the Oaks at Epsom over Emily Upjohn, who was the better horse on the day and is the better horse, but Emily Upjohn is fabulous. And if you look at that race, granted it was 1.5 miles, but she was more than 3 lengths clear of Nashua. And I'm not sure that this horse isn't as good at 1.25 miles as 1.5 miles. My theory on her is she just bounced in the Irish Derby, ran back too quick after a huge effort. If you look at her Yorkshire Oaks, I mean, that was an excellent performance over better ground, going left-handed. York is another one of those flatter. It has a huge home stretch, but it's a flat left-handed track. And all Alpinista did, the only horse to beat her, was win the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe. She was okay. Going 1.5 miles in the Prix Vermeil. And then I thought she was traveling like pretty well in the Opera, and she doesn't pick up the same way on softer going. If the rain doesn't come, I think she has a great chance.
Yeah, I think the first inclination with her might be to say, oh, she's just a mile and a half horse. This is going to be too short for her based on the effort last time. But I think it makes some good points about her ceiling being right there with some of the others in here. So she definitely is one you can consider. One more horse that we should mention is the Canadian filly Moira, who is kind of difficult to figure where she slots into this race. I know she's got a big following, being a filly that did beat males in the Queen's Plate, but I just wonder how that EP Taylor form from last time is going to stack up here, even though she did obviously have trouble.
I hope her following bets on her, because I don't think that she has any chance in this race.
Yeah, this is definitely a big step up in class for her. Let's move on to the Breeders' Cup Sprint. And among all of the DRF packages that you can peruse on DRF.com or the shop.drf.com page is the Timeform US package, where you can access the pre-entry PPs for In Timeform US. And along with that, you can see the pace projectors for all of these races. Let's take a look at the pace projector for the next race, the Breeders' Cup Sprint. And obviously, you can see a lot of numbers assigned to these horses. Don't worry, you did not miss the post position draw. We're just assigning numbers based on the horses in alphabetical order so we can have some key to see the chiclets in the pace projector. And Marcus, no surprise to see Jackie's Warrior on the front end here. And I think the big question in this sprint is, how much pressure is he going to take? Because he did receive some pressure in the Breeders' Cup Sprint last year and folded, but clearly it might be a different story this year, given the excuse coming out of last year's sprint.
Yeah, I don't put any real stock in that. Clearly was not himself. To me, he and Flightline are the two most likely winners. I guess Cave Rock, but 2-year-olds, I guess maybe you know a little less. But yeah, he lost a Vorgo. But you know, as I alluded to, I wonder if 6 furlongs is more his game. Maybe my fondness for the horse is blinding me to some vulnerabilities that I'm not seeing. But Mike Welsh, our workout guy, was really complimentary of his work this week. You know, he's got a nice break into the race. I think he's the best sprinter in the country. And even though he's a short price, I'm going to approach him as that horse in this race.
Yeah, I mean, the comments I would make about this pace projector with regard to Jackie's Warrior are that the two of the horses that are shown closest to him are not even guaranteed to be in this race. Super Ocho is not selected into the field just yet. And also, Pipeline has first preference in the dirt mile. So yeah. I think it remains to be seen if this pace is going to be as competitive as what's shown here.
This is what Jackie's Warrior will do to Super Ocho.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Jackie's Warrior, let's just take a look at one of his recent replays, a dominant performance in the Alfred G. Vanderbilt over the summer. And grade 1 victories, Marcus, don't get much more visually impressive than this one.
Yeah, I mean, granted, you know, the horses he was running against were not real competition for him. But I guess, David, for me, the thing that is why I like the horse so much is he's a very, very fast horse, and he's got a ton of speed, but he's not just a raw athlete. I always thought he was incredibly smart and functional. Seeing him around the barn a few times, he has that same presence to him. I mean, he's a racehorse. He's like a real racehorse. And that's why he wins this easily, because he'll do what his rider asks. He's not just out there running as fast as he can.
Yeah, I know we talked about this a little bit in the past, but we're both big fans of Jackie's Warrior. It would be nice to see him close out his career with this victory. The horse that could be his main rival in this race is the 3-year-old Jack Christopher, who will be cutting back to the 6 furlong distance. It sounds like he's listed as first preference for the Breeders' Cup Sprint, even though he's also pre-entered in the mile. And he was ran pretty fast in the Alan Jerkins last time, of course, against his own age group. He will be stepping out into older company for the first time.
Yeah, but Goodnight I'd say he's a better horse than anything Jackie's Warrior beat in the Vanderbilt. Another Steve Asmussen trained horse who just won well in the Perryville this past weekend at Keeneland. It's only 220 yards difference between 6 furlongs and 7 furlongs, but it's just such a different kind of race at the highest level. maybe this horse can do it. But, you know, to me, the reason they tried the Haskell at 1.125 is because he's got a little bit more of that rhythm of a 7/8 miler. And I guess they didn't want to go back to 2 turns. And this is a softer race top to bottom than the dirt mile. But, you know, he's going to take a lot of money. He's got a lot of support. He's run some big figures. I mean, he ran up the score against Papa Cap in the Woody Stevens. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I even favor him to run second.
I kind of veer away from that opinion a little bit. I think he is way the likeliest horse to upset Jackie's Warrior if that happens. He's got the speed figures. I'm not really concerned about the cutback to 6 furlongs. I was hoping they'd make this move. He has the natural speed to be forward in this race, and he just seems like the one with the natural ability to do it. I'm not quite sure that Kimari does have that ability. We'll take a look at her winning the honorable miss over the summer. And I know that the recent buyer speed figures suggest that she might be in the same league as horses like Jackie's Warrior and Jack Christopher, but she really is taking a step up in class here.
I've always liked the horse. I thought she had just a vast amount of talent. She's had trouble staying sound, and this is, I mean, she put together 2 top races in a row, starting with the honorable miss and then going on to the Galant Bloom, which is kind of one of the first times she's ever been able to do that. She likes Keeneland as her home track, but I'm with you. I don't think she could run a place, but I don't like her to pull the upset. I mean, I guess, you know, looking at the whole race again, there aren't any other horses. I just can't, Elite Power as like the tiniest bit of interest just because he's improved so much and he won a messy race last time. There could be more to him. I don't think he's fast enough. And most of the other horses are just, to me, don't have any appeal. So, I mean, for me, it's not going to be a race I'm hugely interested in betting because I don't see anything beyond the obvious.
Yeah, if this race comes apart, I agree. Elite Power would be the one that I would look at. I'm much more interested in him than a horse like Aloha West, who did cause the upset in this race last year from off the pace. Elite Power, we don't know yet what his ceiling might be because he really is improving, and the 6 furlong distance with some pace could work in his favor. Let's move on to the Breeders' Cup Mile as we move into the late pick 4 sequence for this Breeders' Cup Saturday. And this is a really strong field for the mile. We've got a strong group of runners coming over from Europe. We have potentially a new breakout American star in Annapolis who recently won the Turf Mile at Keeneland. He is just a 3-year-old, but clearly is improving at the right time, Marcus, and he's got that victory over the course that we're looking at here.
Yeah, he got a great trip in this race, but, you know, a lot of times you have to give the horse credit for making his luck. And his natural speed and his responsiveness to his rider allowed him to get the trip that he did. And he's just a natural miler who's had a lot of talent all along. I really like the way he put this race away with a good turn of foot. He's probably going to have to run better to win this race, but I don't see why he can't. He's pretty lightly campaigned. The Saratoga race, the Saranac, was essentially a workout. His Saratoga Derby was just too far. I think he can improve again, and I think he's a legitimate chance.
The other U.S.-based runner that I think is just very intriguing being a starter in this race is Domestic Spending, who we have not seen in well over a year. He's kind of a surprise entrant here for trainer Chad Brown. I mean, this would be quite the story if he was able to pull this off the year-plus layoff, but he's just kind of the wild card you don't know what to do with in this race.
Yeah. Well, the crazy thing is when he was injured last year for the Breeders' Cup, he was going for the 1.5 miles, and now to come back in the mile, I mean, that's asking a lot. I wonder how much betting he's going to take. I I don't
I
know.
really don't know. It's a
Yeah.
tough one to figure out how the public
Yeah.
is going to assess this horse. But clearly, Chad Brown must have a lot of confidence, because this is not his kind of move to run a horse like this in a race this prestigious
I know.
with no prep. He does not do this that often. So
I
clearly, the
know.
horse must be giving him some signs. As for the Euros, we do have to talk about them because they're a pretty strong group. The one who I guess the Americans are most familiar with is Modern Games, who, of course, won the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf last year, a controversial running of that race. But more recently, we saw him up in Canada in the Woodbine Mile. Let's take a look at the replay of that race. And he could not have been much more impressive this day. I don't think too many people had expected him to run again between this race and the Breeders' Cup, but I don't think he lost anything in defeat in that Queen Elizabeth last time.
Yeah, I didn't expect him to run. But the race is often 2 weeks before the Breeders' Cup, and this time it's 3 weeks. I mean, Ivar was probably not quite at his best. He didn't have a perfect trip in the Woodbine Mile, but this horse just annihilated them. He's run some really good races this year. I mean, he's a Guineas winner in France. I don't think that was an especially strong race. And I really liked his Sussex, where he's beaten only by the Great Baid. And as you mentioned last time, he did not lose anything. Bayside Boy, who beat him, is among the pre-entrants in this race. Definitely not certain to make the trip. From what I've been told, I don't really expect to see him. That hasn't been ruled out when I talked to the stable the other day. But that's a straight course mile. And again, I don't know why they're calling the course good to soft. It was not, there was no good about it. It was soft to very soft. It took him 1:45 and 2 to run a mile, like 7 seconds slower than par or something like that. I mean, and that's why Bayside Boy won. He handled the ground, and most of the horses that day were just spinning their wheels. Modern Games on a straight course mile to gut out a second place finish was a really strong piece of form. Did it affect his chances for this race, coming back 3 weeks, shipping internationally? I don't think it enhanced his chances.
Another horse that ran on that Champions Day card over that good to much more soft course was the sprinter Kinross, who won the British Champion Sprint Stakes. And Marcus, could this be another Space Blues where he's able to stretch out and win the mile? Is he that kind of horse?
I think he is. And where Modern Games would prefer it to be firmer, this horse really likes it soft. I don't know how he'd do at Keeneland, which is a different kind of course, but he loves the soft going. That's a 6 furlong race that requires stamina. His Prix de la Forêt, that's a race that has produced, as you mentioned, Space Blues. Goldakova ran in that race a couple times. I mean, it's a 7 furlong race that's a race for horses to go a mile in America. The trainer and connections don't have any qualms about him getting the mile. I don't really either. He's a little bit like, well, not really. I mean, he's like Highfield Princess in the sense that he's just way better this year than he's ever been before. But if you go back to his Jury-Old season, he was the favorite in the Rotem Futurity. I mean, he's a horse that was highly regarded from the start, and he's a gelding. So, I mean, the hormonal coursing wasn't doing him any favors. And, a horse like that, they hit 5 and suddenly they completely find themselves. The trainer says he basically trains himself. I know he's kept a busy schedule, but I think he's formidable.
Yeah, we're trying not to spend too long on each one of these races, but we could go through just about every horse in this mile and make the case for them, because the horses that are listed as being selected into this field, they almost all have credentials to win a race like this. I mean, horses like Dreamloper has a big performance. The Chad Brown trainee, the other one, Rico Glory, the mare. I mean, she is definitely one you can consider in this race. And we didn't even mention the winner of this race from 2 years ago at Keeneland, Order of Australia, at a big price. I mean, he's back in here as well.
Yeah, he's I'd be surprised if he wins again, but he's in good form. He ran a solid race last time.
Let's move on to the next race, the Distaff, back over to the dirt course. And Marcus, this one likely to be one of the smaller fields that we see among the Breeders' Cup races on Saturday. There are, I believe, just 8 pre-entrants, with only 7 listing this race as their first preference. But where it does not have the quantity, it certainly does not lack for quality, as this is one of the more competitive races. And we do have two Todd Pletcher trainees that I think we have to begin with. Nest and Malathot, who are likely to vie for favoritism in this race. I assume Nest is going to be the public choice, just given the visually impressive nature of her last trio of victories, I should say. She'll be facing older rivals for the second time here after beating a much weaker group last time in the Beldame. But she seems like she's going to be pretty tough.
Yeah, I guess. So you're a Nest positivist?
I'm not against Nest. I don't know if I'm going to be able to swallow the likely short price, but I think if I had to name a most likely winner, she'd be it.
Okay. I don't think I feel the same way. I mean, she's definitely progressed through the year, and she didn't have much of a trip in the Kentucky Oaks. She might have been the best horse. And she beat Skippy Longstocking to get second in the Belmont. I guess the holes I would poke in her is the Coaching Club American Oaks was early in the Saratoga meet when the track was like a plowed field. I mean, Secret Oath just completely fell apart at the top of the stretch. She didn't handle it at all, and she was already over the top anyway. And then all Nest had to do was beat her again in the Alabama, and I mean, she could have run backwards and beat those horses in the Beldam. She's fine, but I don't know that she's superior. You know, and you mentioned Malathot, the other Todd Pletcher horse who had a nice easy prep over this track, also beat overmatched rivals, as you can see from her 1-2 price in the race. She's very good. Always to me been a little bit overrated, and she'll probably be overbet here because I like Clairiere in this race. I thought Clairiere was Malathot's slight superior earlier in the year, and she had a major excuse for her last race where she banged her face on the gate and was running with a broken face. That's not ideal. She's coming into this fresh. I think she's going to be set for a big performance. We got a pace projector for this race, right?
We do, and we'll show it, I guess, after this replay. And Marcus did send in the Distaff replays, and I kind of got a window into his thinking based on the races he did send over, as we just showed that Chuvy victory for Clairiere. And arguably, Malathot was not at her best that day when Clairiere beat her, but I agree, they both faced off seemingly at their best in the Ogden Phipps prior to that, and Clairiere did get the upper hand. So it just is a matter of whether she can bounce back. But one concern for Clairiere, Marcus, might be this pace projector, because while it doesn't show that blue flag indicating a favors on or near the lead situation, there isn't that much speed signed on to challenge Society, who is shown out on the front end, and she is the other Steve Asmussen runner in this race. And after this pace projector, we can take a look at Society's most recent victory when she won the Grade 1 Cotillion at Parks. And this, a breakout performance for her, and you might say, where did it come from? But she had been cycling up to this a little while, and based on the evidence of this effort, she might not be out of her depth in this race.
Oh, I don't think she is. She is a sneaky horse in here for sure, especially if she shakes loose on the lead. That seems entirely possible. I mean, I would even suggest that her Charlestown race was a breakout performance. She set a track record. She ran way faster than Frank's Rocket that day, and the horse she beat was a bull ring specialist. I know it's a lesser field, but just visually, she was incredibly impressive. She had no chance in the race at Saratoga, where she completely blew the break. So I can't judge her off of that. She's just so ascendant at the moment, and it's going to be the right price. I'm not discounting her chances in the least.
Yeah, I mean, she has not faced the kind of quality that she'll be meeting in this race. That Cotillion field, in retrospect, the horses that were supposed to challenge her just threw in inexplicable clunkers that day. So
Agreed.
I question that performance a little bit, but that pace projector does make me give her a second look. And we haven't really mentioned Search Results, who I think does deserve also top billing along with the others. I mean, while she hasn't won the grade ones this year, she's been right there in a couple of them, and she's got the tactical speed to be the one that makes that first run in Society. So I think she's another that you can certainly consider in here.
Absolutely. And the way the Keeneland track often plays, favoring horses close to the lead, she's going to get first run. And if Society doesn't have the quality to maintain her early advantage, she might be able to gut it out to the wire. She's not naturally, to me, a 1.125 horse. A 1.16 is probably the end of her peak range, but she's not incapable.
Let's move on to the late double of Breeders' Cup races on Saturday. The Breeders' Cup Turf, the final turf race on that Saturday card. This one, of course, going the 1.5-mile distance. And Marcus, this is one where the Europeans typically dominate. They've had a real run of success in this race, and they have brought over some very nice horses this year. Among them is Mishrif, who, going back over the past couple of seasons, has produced some of the best performances of anybody in here. We'll take a look at his Dubai Shima Classic victory from 2021. So this was well over a year ago. He hasn't won a race this year, so I guess you can question the form that he's in right now, but clearly he's got efforts in him that are going to put a hurting on this field.
Yeah, I mean, I chose this race because it's his only turf race over an American-style course, and it shows that even though he is naturally a 1.25-mile horse, on this type of track, he can get 1.5 miles. Those were excellent horses behind him in that race. 2 Japanese horses, Chronogenesis, Superstar, Loves Only You, won the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf. American people know her. He was not a horse for the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe. It's just not his race. And I can say that his other races this year were all good to solid. Don't love him. He won't, but I mean, I think he's going to be a little bit overlooked. With I think the attention really being focused on Rebel's Romance for Godolphin and Appleby.
Yeah, I think the two Godolphin and Appleby runners in here are probably just a little bit sexier looking than Mischief coming into this race. And, based on form, you would probably rate Rebel's Romance a little higher, though you could question what he was facing in a couple of those Group 1 victories in Germany, I think. On ratings, he certainly has not achieved the heights of Mishrif, though he does seem like he's a progressive sort coming into this race. And you could say the same about the 3-year-old Nation's Pride, who people might be looking to repeat the success of the Abir last year, also coming out of that Jockey Club Derby.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't see it with the Abir, so take my dismissal of Nation's Pride with that in mind. I don't really see it with him. The weird thing about the German form is it was totally underrated last year. Alpinista was there, and she ended up winning the Arc this year, and Torquedo Tasso was there. He's a German horse. He won the Arc last year and was an excellent third this year. Now I feel like maybe it's a little bit overrated this year. However, I mean, Samarco, who Rebel's Romance beat last time, was the German Derby winner and raced right with Torpedo Tasso earlier in the year. He's a legitimate horse, a really good horse. And this is such a weird horse, David, to have made his first, 7 starts on dirt and synthetic tracks. Mm-hmm. He didn't even try turf until this summer. If I remember right, he was mentioned as a Kentucky Derby possibility after the UA Derby, and that was quickly shot down. But the point is, he's a horse who's had a lot of quality for a long time. You look at his turf races, they're all good to firm. He wants to stay on the top of the ground. If it rains and there's give in this course, I don't think that's going to suit him at all.
Yeah, I believe he was here and ready to be entered in the Belmont Stakes before they had to withdraw him, I think, on the morning of entry day.
All about that. Yeah.
And clearly, he's turned into a different kind of horse since then, as you alluded to. He's become a turf specialist, and he definitely is one to consider in here. But the Americans will be putting their hopes in a mare in this race, and that is Warlike Goddess. Let's take a look at her last out victory when she beat the males in the Turf Classic at Aqueduct. And this was one of the better performances of her career, as she really did step up against this field. But again, you have to question what she was beating here, because this is not a vintage group of American turf males over the marathon distance.
No, it's not. But you can only beat who you're in against, as they say. And she did win well. I thought, to me, the big takeaway there was how she was able to stay much closer to the pace and still produce the finish we're accustomed to seeing from her. She likes Keeneland, big thing there. I don't think she minds it if it's a little wet. And I think she was probably the best horse in the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf last year. It's just a question of, she gets she gets bet a lot. And if she, I don't know what kind of price she's going to be, but I wouldn't take her at a short price, but I wouldn't be surprised if she's competitive with anyone in this field.
I agree. I think she has a better chance than a lot of American horses that have been short prices in the turf in the past. And I'll be interested to see how she stacks up because some solid Euros have come over. I don't think that there are any real standouts in this race. So again, I would let price be your guide with Warlike Goddess. Let's move on to the final Breeders' Cup race of the weekend, the feature. It is the Classic, the one that I know a lot of people are looking forward to the most. Marcus, I know you did some looking into past Classics with regard to a horse like Flightline, who is going to be a prohibitive favorite. And there have been many short prices over the years in the Breeders' Cup Classic, and the results are sort of a mixed bag.
Yeah, not as many wins as you'd expect, I would say, although when you look at the horses, was Easy Goer a Flightline at 1-2? I mean, he had a very legitimate rival too. Slew a Goal, he probably wasn't Flightline. Curlin on a synthetic track, he was 4-5. That was kind of a crazy short price for that. And California Chrome, never as brilliant as this horse. So I guess, the fact is these horses do get beat, but I wonder if the circumstances are a little different this year.
I agree. Flightline seems to be the kind of generational talent that I'm not sure you could say about a lot of the other horses on this list, even though they came into their respective classics as standouts. But I think it's just a testament to how difficult it is to win a race like the Breeders' Cup Classic, where you really do have to be the best of the best. And before we get into the contenders, we also have a Timeform US pace projector for this race. And Marcus, I love the way this shaped up. I mean, it's not based on somebody's opinion. This is just what the algorithm spit out based on the pace figures. And this is the matchup people are hoping to see. Flightline and Life is Good on the lead.
Yeah, well, I would also take note of the gap back to Hot Rod Charlie there. Because it's a sort of a situation where even if Flightline draws inside, he might have a chance to take back a bit and come out and get on the outside. I mean, I'd say the last thing his connections would want would be to go head in head with Life is Good all the way around the track for a mile and see if he could finish off the last quarter mile following that. And if he did get in a duel with that horse for a long time, even as good as he is, I don't know if he could win. But I saw a degree of handiness in his last two races that suggests he doesn't have to run that way. And he can use his speed in various manners, which makes him even more tough to beat.
Well, let's take a look at that jaw-dropping performance from Flightline last time in the Pacific Classic. And this is one that you could just go back and watch for pleasure because you don't often see these kind of efforts. And very rarely in the modern day do you see horses winning by this kind of margin against this quality of field, running the kind of speed figure that he earned. I mean, this was something to behold. And, early in this race, I thought it was interesting the way Flavien Prat kind of kept him outside a little bit, was really trying to get him to settle for that opening quarter mile. And I almost kind of thought to myself, he's riding him like he's going to have to when he faces Life is Good, because I agree with you. They're probably going to want to take back slightly off Life is Good and not engage in that duel.
Yeah. Country Grammar, he won the Dubai World Cup over Hot Rod Charlie. He was beaten 19 and a half lengths. It seems impossible. The thing about this horse is he was so brilliant sprinting and he overcame trouble in the one-turn mile at Belmont. But, when they got him out to a mile and a quarter, it's just like it gave him more of an opportunity to assert his superiority. Whereas like Life is Good, he's a brilliant horse in his own right. I mean, he's run great races, from a mile and an eighth to 7 furlongs. He almost beat Jackie's Warrior last year. And that horse is a powerhouse. He trains like an absolute beast and he's got all the talent in the world. And granted, the surface at Meydan was not to his liking and Dubai World Cup night. It took away from his brilliance and didn't allow him to show who he really was. But even accounting for that, when he tried a mile and a quarter, he took a little step back. Whereas this horse, it just enhanced everything that was good about him. That's what makes him freakish.
Yeah, Flightline just appears to be in another league, and I think we're all waiting to see if he can do what he did in the Pacific Classic again, because that was a level that he had not achieved before, and maybe he's just getting even better, as scary as it is to think. But I'm very much looking forward to seeing what he can produce, and it's going to be a really tough trip for Life is Good. Any way you break it down, I get why they have to run in this race. I mean, there's no point in running in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile again,
No.
but it's going to be really tough for Life is Good to pull this off on the front end. And I think a lot of us consider the main rivals to Flightline, if there are any, could be those up and coming 3-year-olds. And one of them, of course, is the Travers winner Epicenter. Let's take a look at his victory in the Midsummer Derby. And, it feels like this was a very long time ago, kind of given what's transpired since then and the emergence of, Flightline's Pacific Classic. But Epicenter was really good this day, and he has just been getting better and better. And he's not one that needs to be involved in that early pace.
No, but weirdly, he was so fast early in the year going to the lead. The one time he lost, it was because he went too fast and was a little too headstrong in the LeCompte when he was beaten by a vastly inferior foe who ran a good race on the day. But to me, it's incredible that he started his career at Churchill in November or fall of 2021, whenever it was. And I'm sure they didn't go hard with him all the time since then, but he's basically been on a regular racing pattern since then. And to run the best race of his life at the end of August in the Travers, I mean, if you see him, you can see why he could do that. He's a very powerful horse. And whereas Flightline is powerful too, but he's had to be treated with kid gloves to keep him going. This horse can take it. I mean, that's what Asmussen said, why he thought he could win the Derby with him. And, he didn't win the Derby, but in retrospect, he's the leader of his class and he probably should have won the Derby. But the reason that he especially liked his chances going in is because he could take everything that was given to him in the morning to help him, make the necessary progress in terms of stamina and building his speed in different ways, whereas some horses just don't have the ability to withstand that. That, to me, makes this nice little gap between the Travers and the Breeders' Cup really interesting, because he may actually have had more time to develop in the morning. And he doesn't have to run that much faster to make this competitive if Flightline just takes a little step back.
Yeah, I think it's all dependent on whether or not Flightline is able to repeat that Pacific Classic and whether or not these others have a chance in here, including the other 3-year-old Taba, who should not be forgotten. He is kind of improving along those same lines as Epicenter, albeit not with the same foundation. He's come along much quicker, but his Pennsylvania Derby was a step forward for him. And from a speed figure standpoint, it's not like he's that far off Epicenter, and certainly the older horses, not counting Flightline.
Yeah, I think he's very good. He's a funny horse. Got an unusual shape. He's a goofball. I saw him in person, a little Derby week, but then at Monmouth at the Haskell. And the only thing that stood out to me was his playfulness, where I don't know if he's going to be up to this. I think he's going to be a really good 4-year-old. I assume he's going to be campaigned as a 4-year-old. I can see him being an excellent horse in 2023. Who is not quite ready to win a race like this.
Yeah, we didn't even mention Olympiad, who is a 6-time stakes or 5-time stakes winner this year. He's 6 for 7. I mean, given his resume and the kind of speed figures he's earned, there are situations where in other years he'd be vying for favoritism in the Breeders' Cup Classic. Oh. But I think he's 15-1 on Brad Free's morning line for this race, and it sounds about right. I mean, it's just a really tough Breeders' Cup Classic this year.
Yeah. Like, think about John Sadler trains Flightline. He won this race before with Accelerate, and I think that this horse would easily beat Accelerate. It's just not one of those years. And I really loved the horse through the spring and early summer, and I know he bounced back last time, but I just don't see that he has the room to improve that these 3-year-olds might.
Yeah, they've run him in the right spots and they've made the most of his ability, but this seems like a tough spot for him, just given the depth of this field. Well, we've taken you through all 14 of the Breeders' Cup races, given you our preliminary thoughts. Hopefully, we'll have some time. I know we've run a little bit over, but let's try to take some questions. And we've got a big batch of them, so we'll try to get through as many as possible. Maybe we can take turns answering them a little bit. Our video producer, Lucia, will kindly cue some up for us along the bottom of the screen, and we can read them. This one's from Karen from Kentucky. She asks, the long-term weather forecast calls for rain Thursday through Saturday, the Breeders' Cup. Who might move up or down if the dirt is sloppy or the turf is soft?
Well, first of all, I checked my little forecast on my phone when I saw this question, and I saw a 12% chance of rain Thursday, 36% Friday, and I didn't see Saturday. So I don't know. To me, there were, a couple obvious ones stood out to me. In the mile, I think a wet, rain moves Kinross up and maybe pulls Modern Games down a bit. That's one. And we talked about it in the Filly and Mare Turf as well. Above the Curve is a horse who is really good on soft ground, and it might help her more than it helps Nashua on Tuesday and in Italian.
Yeah, in the dirt mile, Cody's Wish seemed to skip over the mud in his Westchester earlier this year. So, he's another one that would not be bothered by the dirt being sloppy. But I agree with Marcus. It's a little early to get too caught up in weather forecasts. Let's see another question. Kenneth from Ohio asks, are there any horses currently on the AE list that you think can win or hit the board if they draw in? Well, I'll say the one that I was most concerned would be on the AE list was Kijira in the Juvenile Fillies Turf. She actually did draw into the race. Marcus, going through these races, my first reaction to seeing the pre-entries was that the right horses are in each of these fields. I didn't feel like there were too many that were excluded that should not have been.
The one that I thought that stood out to me was Webslinger in the Juvenile Turf. I thought it was like he won the $500,000 now over Oxymore, who got in, and Le Chase and Battle of Normandy and Gaslight Dancer. I thought that he was more qualified for the race than they were. He might still get in. He just needs one defection, and I don't like him that much, but he'd have a chance. He improved in his first two-turn race. Just going through here, I agree. There's nobody in just sitting waiting to get in that is gonna knock my socks off.
I would agree with that. And let's move on to another question. Okay, this one's a two-parter. Matt from Massachusetts asks, how do you handicap the turf races in particular, given the inclusion of the overseas runners? Is there any advice you can give to compare performances?
Well, I wrote down one word: homework. Because the past performances there are just not anything like we have here. Many of the tracks now post fractional times that you can look up, but they're not in the Racing Post results and stuff like that. You have to go to a different website. And for me, I cover the Europeans a lot of the year, and so I know some of the horses pretty well, but there's nothing like going back and watching the races that the horses have run and seeing who they've run against to get a good sense of the context for them coming over here.
Yeah, I have little to add to that. And the second part of Matt's question is, do the Timeform US speed figures match up for domestic and overseas horses? I think I can take that one.
Yeah.
If you use the Timeform US PPs, they include the Timeform US speed figures for the American runners, and we also import the Timeform ratings for the overseas runners. We try to make the Timeform US speed figures on that global scale so you can make a direct comparison for the Timeform ratings, but Timeform ratings are a different beast. They're not speed figures, they're weight based, especially with some of the younger runners. You don't often get that direct comparison. Sometimes you'll see the US horses maybe slightly overrated, but it usually is pretty close. And also, if you're using the Timeform USPPs, they include some in-depth commentary from their foreign correspondents that I think are really helpful in assessing that European form. So hopefully that answers Matt's question. Let's take a look at another one. Jim from New Jersey asks, how important is it for a jockey to have previously ridden a horse successfully? Also, how important is it that a horse has raced on the Keeneland surface?
Huh.
Marcus, do you
Well,
put any stock in jockey experience on a horse?
I mean, it totally depends on the horse. Some horses are easy to ride, where pretty much any competent rider could do things right. And some horses are really tricky to ride, where if you don't know all their quirks and foibles, then you're going to fail. But that's it on an individual basis.
Yeah, and I know some riders will say that they like having never ridden a horse before because they don't have that baggage in their head when they go to ride them for the first time. I mean, you always think about the that quintessential first ride of Jerry Bailey on our Kong in that '93 Breeders' Cup Classic, and he just said, it was a benefit that I didn't know the horse because I got to ride him the way that I wanted to ride him. Here's another question. Mike from California asks, which day do you have a better chance to find a single in a pick 4, pick 5, or pick 6 wager? That's a good question. I guess we could both take a shot at this. I would say the one I'd have the most confidence in would probably be Cave Rock in the Juvenile on Friday. I think I would rank him slightly above Flightline, just given the respective depth of each field.
It's interesting. My thought was it depends on what you want in a single. Like Cave Rock and Flightline and Jackie's Warrior are going to be pretty much universally singled, so you don't get a lot of bang for your buck. I mean, I would say put in the work and find a horse that's a little bit better priced that you think is more of a standout, and try to key things around that. I mean, I will find it hard to play against Flightline, but I might try to beat him. Yeah, that's interesting what you said about Cave Rock. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way before.
Yeah, I mean, and I think Marcus's answer is probably better than the one I gave because you do want to be value-minded in these races, and sometimes your edge on a day like the Breeders' Cup is singling or really leaning heavily on a horse that a lot of other people might not be. So if, like, say, Marcus loves Campanelli on the Turf Sprint and that's his single, perhaps that gives him an edge in the pick whatever sequence going through that race.
There you go.
Jim from Maryland asks, the Platinum Queen is a 2-year-old who just beat Olders in the Group 1 at Longchamp. How do you adjust time form ratings for her? Is she competitive? I think we already covered this pretty well when we discussed the Juvenile Turf Sprint. It's based on weights, and the time form ratings do take into account the fact that she was getting so much weight from her competition. Let's take a look at another question. Mike from New York asks, what do you think are the chances Manhattan Jungle gets into either the Juvenile Turf Sprint or the Juvenile Fillies Turf? That's a good question. She is listed first on the AE list for the Juvenile Turf Sprint. So I would say it's very likely she gets into that race because there's at least one that has a different preference as their top. So if they want to run her, I think she can get in there.
Najarok is first preference Juvenile Turf. So if they go with their first preference, then she's in.
Let's take a look at another question. Kenneth from Washington asks, Nest and Flightline have been dominant in their divisions. Is there another horse that can be a serious threat in their respective races? Well, I think we would both say yes, though I think Marcus would have a more resounding yes than me with regard to Nest.
Oh, yeah. I definitely think that's a very competitive race, the Distaff. I mean, in the Classic, for me, the only horse I think could beat Flightline, unless he just falls apart. I mean, I'm not really expecting that, so I'm not figuring it into the way that I'm thinking about the race. But Epicenter is the horse that I think would have a chance to beat him.
Yeah. Tony from Texas asks, in your opinion, is Flightline a deserving favorite or a likely beaten favorite? I mean, favoritism, I guess, answering that question, he is the most likely winner, and I think neither of us are disputing that, so sure, he deserves to be favored. Whether or not you want to play against him, I think it just depends on the price he has in value.
Yeah, well, I think there's a question regarding what's fair value for him in the Classic, which is kind of, I don't know, it's a tough one to answer.
I think we have one more question. And Marcus, you just previewed it. What do you consider to be fair odds on the favorite in the Classic? This one's from Joseph from New York. And I think we basically know who's running in the Classic. I mean, Cyberknife was pre-entered. He's likely to go in the dirt mile instead. So looking at the field, what would you say are fair odds for you on Flightline?
I mean, 3 to 5.
Yeah, I would say in the 3 to 5 to 4 to 5 range for me.
I was right between there. I mean, I wanted to say 4 to 5, but I think he's like a more legitimate 3 to 5 shot. Now, I mean, do you bet him at that price? It just depends on who you are. I mean, you have to dump a massive amount of money on a horse to win at that price for you to really even consider it. That's not how I bet. I don't have that much money. So like I could say his fair odds are 3 to 5. That doesn't mean I'm going to bet him at 3 to 5. It just means that I think he's legitimately that price.
Yeah, and fair odds, I mean, we think about it in terms of win wagers, but I mean, it goes beyond that to how strongly you want to use the horse in your multi-race sequences. If you think he's a real underlay and you're considering singling him, I mean, if you really think Flightline is going to be 1 to 5 and you think his odds of his chance of winning the race are more like even money, maybe you should reconsider that strategy, just single Flightline, because there might be better ways to build your tickets to go against him a little bit, because he's not likely to be the value that you think he is in that last leg of the sequence. So I think we went through all the questions that we have. Marcus, this was a lot of fun. I hope everyone enjoyed listening to this. We covered a lot of ground, but there's always a lot to talk about with the Breeders' Cup.
I feel ready. Let's have it this weekend.
I am ready as well, although there is a little bit more work to do when we get those post positions.
I'm afraid so.
Early next week. Before we close, I just want to mention a few other opportunities, promotions from Daily Racing Form. DRF, the Breeders' Cup pre-entry past performances, they are now available. You can go to DRF.com and access them. Get your first look at all of the championship races when you purchase a DRF Breeders' Cup package. Just go to shop.drf.com and get yours today. And also, get free DRF past performances when you play the races on DRF Bets. Join DRF Bets and use promo code STAKES to get started with a $200 first deposit match bonus. When you make your first wager, you'll receive 10 free past performances of your choice, either classic or formulator. Just go to drf.com/bet for more information. DRF is your home for handicapping and wagering. Again, that is drf.com/bet. Everybody, thanks for tuning into this. And if you want a little bit more of the content from Marcus and I, remember you can get those DRF betting strategies for the Breeders' Cup. They are included in all of the DRF packages that you see on the shop.drf.com page. So Marcus, I'm looking forward to putting that together with you next week.
I am too. Should be fun.
Everybody, thanks for listening to this webinar and good luck at the Breeders' Cup.